Thank you very much. First Minister's questions now. Question number 1 from Jackson Carlo.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Police Federation, the Scottish Police Authority and the Association of Superintendents all say that this year's budget allocation for policing is wholly inadequate. Why is the First Minister ignoring these warnings?
First Minister.
Well, first of all, let me point out to Jackson Carlo and the Chamber that in the draft budget for the year ahead, we've committed an extra £42 million of funding for Police Scotland. That's a 3.6% increase. That includes an increase in resource funding to protect officer numbers, but it also includes an increase in capital funding. And I think that is important, and I think it's welcome. As the Deputy Chief Officer of Police Scotland, David Page, said recently, the draft funding settlement for policing in 2020-21 includes an uplift of revenue funding of £37 million, which is £17 million higher than originally anticipated, something that we welcome. Stuart Carroll, the Association of Scottish Police Superintendents, in his submission to this Parliament's committee, said it is certainly welcome that the settlement includes an additional £37 million in the Police Scotland budget. Now, I recognise that in our police service, as across all of our public services, there is still an impact being felt of a decade of Tory austerity, and we will continue to work to protect the police and our other public services. We are in a budget process, and I say to the Conservatives, as I say to other parties across this chamber, if they want in the next stage of this process to bring forward credible proposals, then this government is willing to discuss them.
Jackson Carlo.
Right, the First Minister needs to get up to speed with our government. We actually have come forward with credible proposals which have been communicated to our Finance Secretary. It's quite clear that neither she nor her government have come anywhere close to meeting the budget allocation that frontline officers and the SPA believe is needed to ensure a sustainable policing service. And the First Minister can dissemble all she likes, but this is what frontline police officers in Parliament today and deeply concerned by this issue are saying. The Chief Constable has personally made clear that Police Scotland need money to retain officers, begin to tackle the huge problems in the police estate, and give frontline officers the equipment they need to keep the public and themselves safe. But there is a black hole of £49 million in the Police Scotland's budget. First Minister, what is your advice to Police Scotland on how they should deal with this funding gap? Cut officer numbers, continue to let the ceilings fall down in police stations and much else besides, or fail to issue essential equipment?
First Minister.
I and this government will continue to work closely with the Chief Constable and the Scottish Police Authority. Of course, this is the government that has maintained police numbers at 1,000 more than we inherited. Jackson Carlo is the representative of a party in the rest of the UK that cut police numbers by 20,000. So I think perhaps he should reflect on that. But, you know, I did say that we would listen to credible proposals. And I would remind the Chamber, Presiding Officer, that the Tories have presided over a real terms cut in the Scottish budget over the past decade of £1.5 billion. Jackson Carlo has regularly put forward proposals for tax cuts for the richest in this Parliament that would cut another £500 million out of the Scottish budget, and yet he comes forward with spending pleas that amount to hundreds of millions of pounds. We have delivered a budget that is fair, that focuses on protecting our public services, on growing the economy, on tackling the climate emergency, and we will talk to and listen, as we are doing, to other parties if they have credible suggestions to make. So I would perhaps say to Jackson Carlo to look again at the credibility of what he's coming forward with, and he will find in this government, and in particular in our new Finance Secretary, a government that is very willing to listen.
Jackson Carlo.
So we can get back to the problems facing Police Scotland, which she could actually do something about. The First Minister trumpets the budget settlement given to Police Scotland, so let's have a look at it in detail. The resource budget is still at least £13 million short of that which the police need just to stand still. And the capital budget is facing a real terms cut. And that's the second real terms annual cut in a row. And here's what Police Scotland say that means. The current capital allocation for policing is amongst the lowest in UK policing on a per capita basis, is low compared to other public bodies in Scotland, and will undoubtedly inhibit our ability to keep up with the threat, harm and risk posed to the people of Scotland from increasing crime. This is when the Scottish Government is receiving a funding uplift of £96 million from the UK Government investment for extra spending on policing. Why is she shortchanging Scotland's police officers?
First Minister.
The draft budget increases Police Scotland's budget by £42 million. If you look at the capital budget, in 2016-17, Police Scotland's capital budget was £20 million. In the draft budget that's just been published, it is £40 million. In other words, it has doubled in the space of a couple of years. That capital budget includes £5 million extra funding specifically requested by the service to accelerate its commitment to greening its fleet. So we will continue to do everything we can to protect our frontline police officers. And I would say again, we are doing this against the backdrop of a £1.5 billion austerity reduction in our budget imposed by the Conservatives, which means Jackson Carlaw and his colleagues have an absolute cheek standing up here talking about our public services. We will continue to put our public services first, and if Jackson Carlaw has got credible proposals to bring that he is also willing to say how should be funded, then of course we will always listen.
Jackson Carlaw.
Presiding Officer, hollow cries of "oh" from Richard Lyle do not pay for more police officers and do not pay for a broken police estate. The wider risk here is obvious, and it has been spelled out bluntly. It has been spelled out bluntly in Parliament this morning by the Scottish Police Federation to the Policing Subcommittee. Here's what they said. The police officers we represent are working harder than ever. They are under strain, and it is taking its toll on their physical and mental health and their families. Their working conditions are not satisfactory. In some cases, through no fault of our own, we are not providing a good service to the public. First Minister, isn't the choice clear? You increase police funding, or you are putting the public at risk.
First Minister.
Well, I lead a government that has kept police numbers at 1,000 more than the level we inherited, and we did that at a time when Jackson Carlaw's party slashed frontline police numbers by 20,000. That is the reality that every police officer across the UK is all too aware of. We're also making sure that our police officers get a decent pay rise, which is more than can be said of his colleagues south of the border. We have increased in this draft budget Police Scotland's funding. We will continue to listen to all proposals. So here's a challenge for Jackson Carlaw. Given the £1.5 billion Tory cut, given the £500 million that Jackson Carlaw would like to take out our budget to give in tax cuts to the richest in our society, given all of that, if Jackson Carlaw and his colleagues want to come forward and tell us where else in the budget we should cut funding in order to fund his proposals, then I am more than happy to listen. But he's got to say how they should be paid for, not just where he wants to spend more money.
Question number 2, Richard Leonard.
Presiding Officer, on Tuesday evening, I attended a public meeting in Salisbury. This is a community faced with the closure of their local GP surgery. Last year, the surgery was cut from 5 days to 3. Now, without any consultation, local people have been told that it will close completely at the end of March. The people of Salisbury know that if this surgery closes, they may never get it back. That's why on Tuesday night, they resolved to fight for its future. They want the First Minister's support. But in a letter to me, she washed her hands of it. So can the First Minister tell the people of Salisbury why she believes that the state of our National Health Service and the closure of GP surgeries is not a matter for her?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, it is absolutely right that patients should be able to see their GP when they need to. That's why we have a record number of GPs working in Scotland. We have more GPs per head of population in Scotland than in the rest of the UK. And of course, we are currently working to plans that will increase the number by at least 800 over the next few years. We expect health boards to engage and support patients wherever there are changes in circumstances to the services that they receive at the practice, and I would expect that to be the case in the GP practice that Richard Leonard refers to. GP practices in Scotland, or at least the vast majority of GP practices in Scotland, are independent bodies who are contracted to deliver services to the NHS. So we will continue to support primary care and GPs in particular, and will continue to encourage health boards to make sure that these services are always accessible.
Richard Leonard.
First Minister, promises of future numbers are little comfort to those communities facing cuts and closures to their GP services next month. And the truth is that the anger that I heard on Tuesday night is not limited to Salisbury. Across this Parliament, members of all parties are acutely aware of local GP services at high risk. Risk because of staff shortages, policy decisions and under-resourcing. Although perhaps that awareness does not extend to all members of this Parliament. Last week, another local community gathered at a packed public meeting to try and save their GP surgery from closure. But the local MSP apparently missed her invitation. Bolton is in the constituency of the Health Secretary. First Minister, if your own Cabinet Secretary for Health does not know about a GP closure in her own constituency, why on earth should people believe that your government is going to solve the GP crisis that patients are facing here in Scotland?
First Minister.
Obviously, important matters for communities across Scotland. That's why we are putting record funding into our National Health Service. It's why we have record numbers of people working in our National Health Service. Richard Leonard said it's not enough to talk about numbers in the future. There are more GPs working in the NHS now than was the case previously. The number of trainee doctors has increased by more than 10% since 2007. We've got an increased number of GP training places. We've got a number of recruitment initiatives across the country for doctors in general and for general practice in particular. We have a new GP contract in place, which of course was agreed with the BMA to tackle some of the challenges that they are facing. So these are the steps we are taking in practice to tackle these challenges. And I say, as I said a moment ago, we've got more GPs in Scotland per head of population than any other part of the UK. And I'll point out to Richard Leonard, that also includes Wales, where his party runs the government.
Richard Leonard.
Well, the First Minister of all people should know that Bolton is not in Wales, it's in Scotland. There is a workforce crisis in primary care services, and it is happening now. And it is happening here in Scotland. And it goes all the way back to the First Minister's door. We know that it takes at least 10 years to train to be a GP. And 10 years ago, the First Minister was a Health Secretary responsible. Yep. This winter saw the worst A&E performances on record. Thousands of patients waited over 4 hours for treatment. Last weekend, public health consultant Dr. Helene Irvin said, and I quote, "Many would not need to use A&E if they had timely access to a GP who knows them." First Minister, when will you accept that you can't claim that you are protecting Scotland's NHS if you are not protecting Scotland's local primary care services?
Minister.
The point I'm making is that the NHS faces challenges in every single part of the UK. Health services face challenges in virtually every country in the world. We are putting record sums of money into our National Health Service. We have record numbers of people working in our National Health Service. We have increasing numbers of GPs and GPs in training, and that's why our health service is performing better. Yes, it's still facing challenges, but performing better than any other part of the UK. Richard Leonard wants to make this all about the SNP, which is why it is entirely legitimate to contrast and compare. Because he says, well, they don't like it either. He says, They say
order,
things
please,
would be better if the Tories were in power. He says things would be better if Labour were in power. So let's look at the reality here in Scotland. Richard Leonard mentioned A&E performance. In December last year, against the 4-hour target, the performance in Scotland was 81.6%. 81.6%. That is not good enough. In Tory England, though, it was 68.6%. 68.6% where the Tories are running a government, and where Labour is running a government in Wales, it was 66.4%. So yes, our health service faces challenges, but all of the evidence says it's the SNP that is meeting those challenges better than any other party in the UK.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I encourage, I think Mr Russell and Mr Swinney in particular, just to, not of all the members. Exactly. Perhaps to set a ministerial example. Thank you. We'll have some constituency questions. The first from Annabel Ewing, to be followed by Mark Ruskell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will be aware of the major unplanned flaring incident at Mismoran last Thursday. The poor environmental rating published yesterday by SEPA and of the walkout by some workers over reported concerns about health and safety. What assurances can the First Minister give to my constituents who remain very anxious about safety and about health and environmental impacts?
First Minister.
Well, can I thank Annabel Ewing for raising what is an extremely important matter for her constituents, and ministers had absolutely no doubt about the very understandable concerns of the local community, as evidenced by the number of complaints that SEPA has received regarding recent incidents. With regard to safety, the complex falls under the control of major accident hazards regulations. These are enforced by the Health and Safety Executive and SEPA, and we have been assured that both regulators continue to monitor the situation very closely. As things stand now, all of SEPA's published data suggests no breach of UK air quality standards. The Scottish Government is staying in very close contact with the regulators, but I hope members will appreciate it would not be appropriate for ministers to interfere in independent regulatory decisions. However, I absolutely recognise the seriousness of this issue, and I'm sure the Environment Secretary would be happy to keep Annabel Ewing and others who have an interest updated.
Mark Ruskell.
As the First Minister has just heard, this Moss-Moran plant is in crisis. Communities are suffering, workers are striking. Meanwhile, the Climate Change Secretary and the Energy Minister have both refused once again to meet with the local community at an emergency public meeting scheduled for tomorrow night. Will the First Minister ensure that the government is represented at this meeting to explain to communities around Moss-Moran exactly what on earth is going on?
Minister.
Look, I'm very happy to consider any request of that nature that is made. I want to be very clear, though, it's not the case that ministers are refusing to attend a public meeting because they are not interested in this issue. There are regulatory enforcement actions underway right now, and it is important that ministers respect the independence of that process, and it would not really be in anybody's interest for ministers to step into territory that is rightly for SEPA and the Health and Safety Executive. But ministers understand and appreciate the seriousness of this issue. We will continue to keep in very close contact with the regulators and take whatever steps lie within our responsibilities to ensure that appropriate action is taken. And the Environment Secretary will be, as appropriate and as far as possible, be happy to keep interested members fully updated.
Gordon Lyndhurst, followed by Alec Rowley.
What is the First Minister's position on reports that the Quake project has offered so-called debenture schemes to corporate donors, and what the project acknowledges as common good land here in Edinburgh?
First Minister.
These are, I believe, matters for the local government. I'm very happy to look into issues that are raised appropriately in this chamber, and I'd be happy to write to the member once I've had the opportunity to do so.
Alec Rowley, to be followed by Emma Harper.
I have a constituent who has MS and who lost her higher rate mobility under the PIP 20-metre rule assessment. This meant she also lost her mobility car and her independence. The MS Society has been lobbying this government and this Parliament to scrap the discredited PIP 20-metre rule when we have the powers to do so. Will the First Minister, in the interest of dignity, fairness and respect, agree to scrap this discredited rule so that my constituent and all those who live with MS can do so with dignity?
First Minister.
I have enormous sympathy with the issue that Alec Rowley has raised, and I hope he'll listen carefully to the answer I'm going to give. I am acutely aware, and the Government is acutely aware, that individuals with fluctuating conditions like MS are failed badly by the UK benefit system. All too often it acts as a real barrier to disabled people accessing the benefits that they are entitled to, and I know that particular concerns have been raised by the MS Society Scotland about the 20-metre rule and how mobility is currently assessed. We are carefully considering how the Scottish Government can better assess mobility to meet people's needs than is done currently, and we are absolutely determined to make improvements to the current system. But we also need to understand, and this is an important point, the potential effects that changing eligibility could have on access to other benefits that are not under the control of the Scottish Government, because PIP is used by the UK Government as a qualifying benefit for other benefits such as disability premiums. We are currently working closely with the UK Government to ensure that any changes we would want to make would not put at risk access to vital UK benefits and payments that remain reserved. But I hope that gives Alec Rowley an assurance that we are looking very carefully and very seriously at this issue, and doing so from a position of enormous sympathy to the argument that is being made.
Emma Harper, to be followed by Maurice Golden.
First Minister, given the lack of response from the UK Government to my repeated correspondence regarding progress with the investigation involving a near collision between a nuclear submarine and a passenger ferry leaving Cairnryan in November 2017, is the First Minister able to contact the UK Government to help me obtain a response to reassure my constituents that sufficient safety measures are in place to avoid this ever happening again? And more generally, does she agree with me that nuclear submarines have no place in Scotland or indeed anywhere around the world?
First Minister.
Well, I certainly look forward to the day when there are no nuclear weapons, not just in Scotland and the UK, but no nuclear weapons in the world. On the issue of safety, which I know is a huge concern to people, I'm certainly happy to ask the relevant minister to contact the UK Government to seek the assurances that Emma Harper is looking for.
Maurice Golden, to be followed by Maurice Corrie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Gledach Hotel in Renfrewshire has a slow internet connection which profoundly impacts their business. It would cost them an eye-watering £165,000 to install a fibre broadband connection from their local exchange, which they can't afford. Like all businesses, they were promised super-fast broadband by 2021, which won't be delivered. So can the First Minister set out what support there is for the Gledach Hotel to get a fibre connection as soon as possible?
First Minister.
To have Paul Wheelhouse look into the particular issue of Gledach Hotel and come back to the member on that. But on the general issue of broadband, of course, Paul Wheelhouse recently updated Parliament on the Government's plan. Our commitment to everybody having access to broadband by 2021 is being taken forward. Where that can't happen through the fibre programme, people will be offered vouchers. But on a matter that is actually substantially reserved, it is this Government that is going to be investing £600 million to provide super-fast broadband to every commercial and residential premise in the country at faster speeds than are available in any other part of the UK. This is a story of Tory failure in reserved matters that this SNP government is having to step in and fix.
Maurice Corrie.
Presiding Officer, the Ministry of Defence has recently invested £63 million into peer facilities at Glenmalon on Loch Long in my local area, which will create and sustain many jobs for the local community. Will the First Minister join me in welcoming this investment by the MOD to enable the United Kingdom's new aircraft carrier strike force to berth on the shores of Loch Long? And does she recognise the major investment that this brings to the Scottish economy?
First Minister.
I welcome investment in Scotland and the UK's conventional defences after many years where we've actually seen cuts to the conventional defence footprint here in Scotland. So I hope that that is something we will see continue, and I would take the opportunities, I'm sure all members would, to pay tribute to all those working in our armed forces.
Question number 3, Willie Rennie.
I agreed with the First Minister when she set out plans to expand nursery education. I agreed with the First Minister when she pledged that we needed quality, not just quantity. So can she tell me why her councillors in Edinburgh want to remove nursery teachers from this city's nurseries?
First Minister.
I should say, just as an aside, I don't actually remember Willie Rennie agreeing with me on these matters, but my memory may be failing me. I am absolutely committed. This government is committed to ensuring that we deliver the doubling of early years education and nursery provision. That is on track, and Parliament is kept regularly updated on that. And I absolutely agree that quality, not just quantity, is important. That's why, for example, the funding settlement supports payment of the living wage to make sure that we're attracting the best people into early years education. And we will continue to take forward these plans because they are not just in the benefit, for the benefit of young people across our country, but will save working families thousands of pounds every year.
Willie Rennie.
That was quite an astonishing dodge. In the last hour, Alison Murphy from the EIS appeared before the Council to describe the cuts to nursery teachers as the worst example of a short-term cut with devastating long-term impacts. This is an SNP council, half a mile up the road, led by our favourite council leader, on what the First Minister called the most important infrastructure project of this Parliament. We know nursery teachers raise the quality. The government's independent workforce review told us that. They help give children the best start in life and close the yawning inequality gap. But it's not just in Edinburgh. 40% of nursery teachers across Scotland have been chopped. We now find that if you have the best qualification as a teacher, you become too expensive to keep. What is the First Minister going to do about this terrible mistake on her big project by her own council? Will she call Adam McVeigh before it's too late?
First Minister.
Local authorities will take the decisions they think are right for their areas, and Willie Rennie constantly talks about the need to empower local authorities. But I'll talk about what this government is doing. This government is presiding over possibly the biggest expansion in the early years workforce that we have seen in the lifetime of this Parliament. Since 2017, we've created over 2,000 additional HNC places, over 800 graduate-level manager places. We've increased the number of qualified staff available. We're creating just under 2,000 additional college and university places. Uptake of early learning and childcare modern apprenticeships increased by 24% on the previous year, and we've got investment in the BA in childcare practice to make sure that we're upskilling the whole workforce. The fact is we're doubling childcare provision. We're seeing the employment of thousands of more workers in that sector. That's a good news story for children and parents across the country, which is why Willie Rennie can't quite bring himself to welcome it.
We have some further supplementary questions. The first from James Kelly, to be followed by Richard Lyle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will be aware of the publication of the Audit Committee's report this morning, highlighting the crisis in Scotland's prisons and the urgent action needed to address these issues. This follows on from years of underfunding of the Scottish Prison Service, which has resulted in 50% overcrowding at Barlinnie, where a lot of prisoners are doubling up in single occupancy cells. We also see illness and mental health issues on the rise among prison officers, and really seriously, the number of deaths in prisons is at 258 between 2008 and 2018. First Minister, these are really serious issues that have been consistently raised. We've had a lot of words and platitudes. When are we going to get some action?
First Minister.
Well, let me talk about action. The budget plans that we announced 2 weeks ago committed an additional £50 million for our prisons. That included a £30 million increase in revenue funding for staffing and other operational costs, and a 43% increase in capital funding, a £20 million increase in capital funding. We're investing in the prison estate, prioritising, of course, the female custodial estate. We're progressing with plans for a replacement of Berlini and development of HMP Highland to replace HMP Inverness. So that investment is strong, and rightly so. But of course, the core challenge that our prison faces is a prison population that is too high. Too many people right now are in prisons that would be better punished elsewhere. And when I say better, I mean better for them and for reducing their risk of reoffending, but better for society as a whole. That's why we're also taking forward a range of reforms. We've extended the presumption against short sentences, expanded access to electronic monitoring, and invested in bail supervision as an alternative to remand. And actually, since November, when the committee was considering these issues, we've already seen prisoner numbers reduce by around 200 because of the actions we are taking. So that's good progress. We will not be complacent. We will continue to invest and reform to make sure that we've got a safe prison service, which we do right now, and that continues, but also that we are providing justice services that are in the interests of society overall.
Richard Lyle, to be followed by Andy Whiteman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, in light of the widespread criticism by Scottish industry and employers of the UK Government's immigration proposals, can the First Minister outline what response UK ministers have made to proposals for a Scottish visa?
First Minister.
Well, shamefully, UK ministers have dismissed at this stage out of hand the constructive proposals that the Scottish Government has made around a Scottish visa. The proposals that were published on immigration yesterday are wrong in principle. They take people who care for us in our care homes and hospitals, people who farm our land, who process our fish, who build our houses, who look after our tourists, service in our restaurants and hotels. They brand these people as low-skilled and imply that they are not welcome here. It is shocking and shameful, and I think it should be opposed. But these proposals are also devastating for the future of our economy. Our demographics mean we need to continue to attract people to come here, and this will make it so much harder. These proposals will make Scotland poorer in the future. They are the biggest risk to our economic prosperity that we face right now. I read in the newspapers this morning that the Scottish Tories are livid about these proposals. So they should be. But rather than being quietly livid, shouldn't the Scottish Tories be standing up for Scotland and doing something about it?
Andy Whiteman, to be followed by Monica Lennon. Andy Whiteman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased that the First Minister does agree that the language and policy on immigration from the UK Government this week is deeply damaging. So does she agree with me that a clear signal that Scotland is more welcoming would be to give those who are seeking asylum here the right to vote in today's Scottish Elections Franchise and Representation Bill?
First Minister.
Well, obviously Parliament will debate these issues this afternoon. The Scottish Government has set out its careful and very considered position on that, and we obviously come from the perspective of wanting to see asylum seekers welcomed here, given the right to work here and play a full part in our society. So we carefully consider all of these issues. But I am very proud of the fact that in Scotland, I hope we have cross-party consensus for the fact that people who live here, generally speaking, no matter where they come from, should have the right to vote in our elections and make a full contribution to the kind of country we are and want to be.
And Monica Lennon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister is aware that thousands of bereaved families are facing agonising delays to find out why their loved ones have died. The Crown Office has now told families it could take a whole year before they receive a final post-mortem report. These families are living with the trauma of a sudden or unexplained death, and they feel failed and abandoned. They were relieved when the First Minister told the Chamber last month that this injustice has her full attention. Can the First Minister advise what action has been taken to end these shocking and cruel delays, and will she meet with some of the families who are coming to Parliament in the coming weeks to hear firsthand how it is affecting them?
First Minister.
Well, these are obviously principally matters for the Lord Advocate and the law officers. I discuss these issues regularly with the Lord Advocate. I will see the Lord Advocate indeed later today, and issues around the toxicology delays that we have talked about before will certainly be matters that he updates me on. In that, there have been investments made and work is ongoing to deal with that issue. The other issue that has been raised previously in this chamber is delays to fatal accident inquiries. I've set out before the issues that the law officers have to deal with there, and I know that it is in everybody's interest that these decisions are taken as quickly as possible. I would be very happy to ask the Lord Advocate to update Monica Lennon on these issues and answer any further questions that she has.
Thank you. Question number 4, Christine Graham.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what concerns the Scottish Government has regarding difficulties that people with visual impairment can have in accessing medical services because a digital by default approach is increasingly being used.
First Minister.
The Charter of Patient Rights and Responsibilities makes clear that everyone should be given information about their treatment and care in a format or language that meets their needs. The Charter was revised last summer. We've written to all NHS boards to remind them of their responsibilities under it. We've made clear our commitment to support children and adults who have sight loss to access the health services and social care they need through our See Here strategy.
Christine Graham.
Thank the First Minister for her answer. However, this does seem to be an issue across Scotland. For example, Newbattle GP Practice, serving my constituents, has adopted e-consult as the means of securing a GP appointment, with only a few exceptions. So constituents have expressed concern that this presents difficulties for them due to visual and other impairments. Does the First Minister agree with me that while these online systems do have their place, they are not the be-all and end-all, and that accessible alternatives must be readily available depending on the needs of the individual patient? Otherwise, this system can act as a barrier with unintended consequences, such as patients having no option but to use A&E instead.
First Minister.
Yes, I do agree with that. It should be clear to any practice and indeed to any health board that their appointment systems must be accessible to all people, regardless of their circumstances. Like Christine Graham, I believe there is a place for e-booking systems, but we must encourage health boards to ensure that where someone has difficulties using the internet, that they can call and speak to someone in person. I'll ask the Health Secretary to look at this particular case and engage with the Health Board to ensure that the principles that are outlined in the Patients' Right Charter are being fully implemented.
Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I wonder if the First Minister agrees with me that if we deploy some fairly simple technology properly, we can ensure that sections of the community, such as people who are visually impaired, can be confident in participating fully in society. And if so, what will the Scottish Government do to enable that deployment?
First Minister.
Yes, I do agree with that, and the Scottish Government works with health boards to enable the deployment of existing and new technologies, and the principles that I've been speaking about in the Patients' Rights Charter are very important. It is incumbent on health boards, whether through technology or in other ways, to make sure that their services are accessible, and we will continue to make sure that health boards realise and live up to those responsibilities.
Question number 5, Jamie Green.
Thank you. To ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government is taking in response to reports that the number of people diagnosed with type 2 diabetes has risen by 40% in the last 10 years.
First Minister.
Reducing the prevalence of type 2 diabetes is a priority. In 2018, we published the Type 2 Diabetes Framework, which sets out measures to make a significant impact on prevention and remission by improving support with people with or at risk of type 2 diabetes. Since then, we've invested an additional £4.5 million to give people better access to weight management services to support effective and sustained changes to diet and lifestyle. As Diabetes Scotland said last week, creating healthy environments which support people to make healthier choices is also critical. That's why the Diet and Healthy Weight Delivery Plan sets out over 60 broad-ranging actions to make it easier for people to eat well and have a healthy weight.
Amy Green.
Can I thank the First Minister for those comments and also add my support for the great work that Diabetes Scotland does. But the reality is that type 2 diabetes is on the rise. This is a worrying trend, and the number of people diagnosed with it in Scotland is over 250,000. But there are estimates there are up to 26,000 Scots living with the condition that have not yet been diagnosed. The majority of these new cases will be linked to obesity. But the good news is that type 2 diabetes is not just treatable, but preventable, and in many cases reversible with the right mix of medication, diet and lifestyle changes. So in light of that, can I ask the First Minister what specifically has been done to identify these undiagnosed cases so these people can be treated? What is the government doing to improve the treatment of those currently living with the condition? But more importantly, does the First Minister believe that it was a mistake to scrap the flagship policy of health checks for 40-year-olds in Scotland, because that removes that vital opportunity to identify these potential cases at an earlier age?
First Minister.
We encourage early detection and diagnosis across a range of conditions, and I think the member is absolutely right to focus on the importance of that. I'm sure he has read the framework for prevention, early detection and early intervention, which deliberately looks at all of these different strands. Prevention is really important. That's why the healthy environment that Diabetes Scotland talks about is important, enabling and supporting people to eat healthily, to maintain a healthy weight, but also early detection. And I'm certainly happy to get the Health Secretary to provide more details of how that aspect of the framework has been taken forward, because as in this condition, as with any condition, if it is not diagnosed and detected, then treating it, and in the case of diabetes, as the member rightly says, possibly reversing it is not possible. So these are all important areas of priority, and that's why they are focused on in that very deliberate way in the framework.
And David Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will be well aware that Scotland has one of the highest rates of type 2 diabetes in Europe and costs the NHS £1 billion a year in avoidable complications. 1 in 10 hospital bed days relate to diabetes. Does the First Minister share my view that we need radical and immediate action to reduce the long-term complications of diabetes, a condition that maims, blinds and kills?
First Minister.
In general terms, yes, I do. Obviously, the specifics here are important, and I think, as Dave Stewart knows, because of his long-standing interest in this must mean action across a range of different areas, as I've just been talking about. Prevention remains the most important focus in many respects. That's why, for example, we are going to, within this Parliament, bring forward the Restricting Foods Promotion Bill to help make sure that people are supported to eat healthily, but also treatment is important, and there is a lot of investment and a lot of effort in our National Health Service to make sure that people have early access to the best possible treatment. So I appreciate Dave Stewart's interest in this, and I know he is aware of the actions that are underway, and the Health Secretary and others within the government are always willing to have discussions about what more we can do to prevent people getting diabetes and then support them to live with it in a way that hopefully sees it reversed, or at the very least managed without further complications.
Question number 6, Jackie Bailey.
To ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government is taking to prepare the NHS to deal with coronavirus.
First Minister.
As it stands today, there are still no confirmed cases of coronavirus in Scotland. However, it is clearly prudent to assume that this will change in the days and weeks ahead. Our NHS is well prepared to respond to disease outbreaks and has tried and tested measures in place for managing public health incidents of this type. Health Protection Scotland and the Scottish Government continue to work closely with boards on their preparedness for managing potential cases. Health Protection Scotland has already produced specific guidance on the investigation and initial management of suspected cases, which has been communicated to boards via a letter from the Chief Medical Officer. The establishment of testing facilities in Edinburgh and Glasgow has enabled quicker notification of results. The Scottish Government is encouraging organisations to ensure business continuity plans are refreshed in light of coronavirus, and we're also promoting good respiratory hygiene practices to minimise the risk of catching and spreading it.
Jackie Bailey.
I welcome the First Minister's response. The spread of coronavirus has been rapid and the numbers affected have increased quite dramatically. And whilst we don't yet have any cases infected in Scotland, it is just a matter of time. On that basis, can the First Minister tell me what additional planning has been undertaken to ensure that there is sufficient infection control staff, additional isolation facilities and sufficient bed capacity in our already overstretched hospitals to cope with the virus?
Minister.
Well, can I say firstly to Jackie Bailey that I do think it is right that it is a matter of time before we see cases here. There is still a lot of learning underway about this virus, who it affects most severely, how it spreads, the rate of infection, and That knowledge is developing almost every day at the moment. In terms of preparedness, we are currently using sensibly the pandemic flu plan to assess and prepare resources and response planning. Health Protection Scotland has produced clinical and laboratory guidance for investigation and initial management, which I spoke about earlier on. We are also looking very carefully at the resources that health boards have and need and how they would require to redeploy resources in the event of a serious outbreak of coronavirus. We have activated the Scottish Government Resilience Room to support these efforts. I chaired a first meeting of that on the 29th of January. So as this situation develops, well, two things. I want to assure the Chamber that plans are well underway and well developed, but as this situation develops, the Health Secretary, of course, will take steps to keep Parliament fully updated.
Thank you very much, and that concludes First Minister's questions. We're going to move on shortly to a members' business debate in the name of Maurice Golden on tackling climate change, the role of Scottish agriculture. But we're going to have a short suspension to allow members, the Minister and members of the public in the gallery to change seats. A short suspension.